Hello and welcome to citiesabc.com podcast series that at the moment is going to the 60 interviews and growing quite fast. Actually, this week we passed in 2 million views, and as well continuing to profile some of the global leaders, authors and thought leaders that are shifting and changing our society and coming up with ideas, narratives and ways of looking at our society, our problems, our business, and all the different things that we have as humanity and as well as citizens. This platform and this podcast series is part of the digital hub, citiesabc.com. That is a platform that we created recently, actually, to look at cities, at citizens, at all the different areas that we have in cities, but as well to create a better, positive look at technology, at data, at ideas, at innovation. That I think it's really important, especially bearing in mind the narratives that we have worldwide, and as well all the issues we've been having recently, especially with the technology being used not for the best things. So today we have with us an author and thought leader that really I'm very looking forward to interview and profile. So John Williams, not to confuse with the John Williams compositor, but a very powerful author that has a couple of books that have been actually being bestsellers, and especially as a new one coming soon that you're going to be talking. But so John Williams, some highlights, is a global innovation expert and founder of the Ideas Lab, which has helped thousands of people start a business they love. And I think that's very important, especially nowadays. He has a career in innovation. He was a senior management consultant at Deloitte, has been special effects software developer for movie makers, including Disney, and independent consultant to the BBC. So that's kind of fantastic highlights. He's actually the author of a new book coming soon, F Work, Let's Play. I'll let John go more on that detail. How to do what you love and get paid for it. I think it's key. And then the guiding principle is life is fleeting. Why waste it on work that has no meaning for you? I think this is kind of very important areas, and I think especially more important than ever, bearing in mind that we have in different areas. So John as well became a digital media CTO at a European startup incubator and at the media technology consultancy team at Deloitte before striking out on his own and consulting independent to major broadcasters around the world. And he's right now a famous writer and author that is growing his international outreach, but has been having as well some tragic background, especially in his bio, that I'm sure he's going to be talking today, but as well has been looking at a lot of the challenges he's been facing as ways to create inspiration and as well to teach and coach people all over the world how to deal with the challenge that we have. One of the things I want to highlight is that his latest innovation, the Pioneer Program, is a blueprint that helps create unique business and brands around their skills and knowledge of people and fast track the ways to success, whatever the state of the economy. And I think this is very important. And that's one last thing as well that we're going to be talking is as well behind the 5-day business startup challenge. So John Williams, welcome to our podcast. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Dinis. I really appreciate that. And thanks for the introduction.
So, John, there's a lot of things here, and I think especially bearing in mind everything happening in the world, which in one end, there's a lot of positive things, but if you look at the news, it seems like it's the end of the world. But I would like to go through your background, and I think this is particularly important for you as an author and as well your background, both as a technologist, both as an entrepreneur, and as well right now as an author and different areas. So I would like to understand from your background, education, and as well family, and a bit of what made you who you are today. I think that's particularly important for our audience as well.
Well, I noticed when I was about 11 years old that I was obsessed with science. I think I wanted to know how the world worked. So I have this image of just reading everything I could find. I started with sort of chemistry and biology and physics, and I tore through all of that stuff, and then realized that I was also interested in how humans work. So I started reading about psychology. I read, I think, the first book, a couple of books of Freud when I was about 12 or 13 or something, and then just carried on with that passion of like, how do things work? How do people work? What's really going on here? That's been the fascination for me. And despite that, I wasn't particularly academically brilliant. So I didn't make it into a big university. I studied physics at college, and then IT, and and then I just wanted to do something creative. So I ended up in technology in the creative industries. And my first job was working for a company that made caption generators and I guess it would be caption generators. And then they went on to create automation systems for TV studios. And it was a tiny little company in the Midlands in England, in a very unfashionable part of the UK. And we ended up creating something that changed the way TV stations work all over the world, and was very successful in its time. That was back in the 1980s. And that was good fun. It also taught me the way entrepreneurs think, because my boss was an entrepreneur. And I remember him coming in one day after lunch and sort of sticking his head through the door and going, "I've had a thought, in TV stations, there's all these bits of equipment everywhere and they don't talk to each other. And they all have their own individual keyboard and their own user interface, which is usually terrible back in the 1980s. And he says, why don't we just network them all together? And then you could control them from one screen. And you can have a touch screen. And then you emulate the buttons that were on that device, because some of them had physical buttons, things that controlled cameras and lighting and mixing desks and you name it. There's a lot of stuff in a TV studio. And then you could just call up the app you want and press the button. So this is the mid-1980s, right before 20 years before Apple created the iPhone. And then he turns to me, his name is Ian Fletcher. He turned to me and said, "John, you start on that." And then just walked out of the room. And unfortunately, so he was a great ideas person, a terrible software manager, because I just went like, what? So he was basically expecting me that afternoon to just start coding. That was kind of the way he worked. So that was my first software job. And then I eventually moved to London to work for a tiny little company called Parallax, which made 2D and 3D, well, it was mostly 2D special effects, actually, software for TV and film. And the week I joined, a company called Avid Technology bought the company. And Avid Technology at the time was one of the biggest names in the industry. If you've ever used a desktop video editor, they were the first people to actually edit video on a computer rather than on tape. They kind of popularized the whole thing. They had a thing called Media Composer, which I think is still going. I think Apple kind of destroyed their business in the end, and a few other people, but they were dominant for a while. And and that included, I was working on getting video in and out of these very large silicon graphics computers. This makes me sound ancient, but now you can get real-time 4K video in and out of your mobile phone. But back then, just getting even 1K video required a supercomputer. And what we did is we signed a big deal with Disney, and part of that deal was that somebody would be on site as an actual software developer for the entire year that they were making this film called Dinosaur, not one of the most famous animated movies. But so I went to Disney Burbank, and we kind of lived there. It was only 6 weeks, but I felt like I was living in LA because we had a flat. We took it in turns to live in, and we had a car. So I took over the car from the previous software developer, and every day I commuted to Disney. And it was a very cool place to work. Lots of people who were very interesting, and surrounded by animators who were all fascinating to hang out with. And when I first started there, I remember them saying, as a software developer, if you ever worked in software, the way you test your own software is in a very rudimentary way. So the way, as developers, we tested our own software was to take like a test transmission, like color bars, and run it through some algorithm we were working on, and then check that the output looked the right color or whatever it was that the special effect was supposed to do. And then we got to Disney, and they said, and this was in a flow diagram, the way you processed effects was, there was what was called a tree, but it was like a giant flow diagram of scenes being added together, positive and processed, and over 100 different elements. And so when I got to Disney, I looked at these flow diagrams they created for this real movie rather than the stupid test things we've been doing back in London. And just, they were terrifying because they just took up the whole screen. And the guy, I remember this guy pointing at the diagram and going like, I've got the dinosaur here and I've got this there and I've got this over there. And he said, can you tell me why the dinosaur's foot is blue? This is a real question he asked me. And I just looked at him and went, I have no idea at all. But I didn't say that. I just thought it. And then I said, well, okay, send me the data and I'll debug it. And for the first week of the job, it was terrifying because I was still relatively young then and didn't have the most confidence in the world. And so to be asked these questions about incredibly complex topics and then to have to try and debug them was huge. But then I discovered after about a week that all I needed to do was say, send me the data and I'll fix it. And when I got the data, I basically simplified until the point where it came down to one box that was not working. And then you could actually, normally I would just send it to the London office and they would fix the bug that's in there. And then I realized at that point it was incredibly boring. So I went from it being really exciting to being very mundane, but it was quite enjoyable being there at Disney. So that was one of the formative experiences. It was quite interesting to see how they made a movie as well, because they had a location wall where they'd gone out to shoot real location footage all over the world. I mean, literally all over the world. And they had pictures of the location crews sort of smiling in front of sunsets in Venezuela or the sea in Bali or some mountains, in the Himalayas. And they would take this footage and also and other stuff, plants and all sorts of stuff, greenery. And then they would take it back to Burbank. And this is how they would composite like the sky from Venezuela with the sea from Bali with whatever it is and stick a couple of dinosaurs fighting in the middle of it. And it was fascinating to see how Disney operated. So that was probably my last, I think that was my last software job. I knew I wanted to break out of just doing software. And I started trying to go freelance. And I spoke to lots of different people. And I think in the process of trying to get some freelance work, I discovered how to sell myself, which is a very useful skill. So it took me months to work out how to do that because I was clueless. I was a typical software geek who certainly when I was younger, I didn't really think about how I came across to people at all. And that's very bad for marketing because marketing is all about understanding how you come across to people and understanding things from the other person's point of view. And in the process of trying to win freelance work, I learned that and eventually ended up in this company that was it was an incubator. Their business model was to take, this is in the year 2000, so still quite a long time ago, taking businesses from America and introduce them to Europe and giving them offices and salespeople and integrators and everything else you would need to establish your company in Europe. And I worked for the integrator and also did sort of sales engineering stuff. And I ended up leading a team there that was doing innovative work around online video. Back at the very, very beginning of online video. And it was a really exciting time because it was the tail end of a dot-com boom. And then unfortunately after 9/11, there was the dot-com crash and the combination of those two things really just destroyed the company because no one was even leaving America to come to Europe. And plus we have a dot-com crash on top of that. And then a member of that company shopped around to try and find us the core team from the digital media division, which I was the CTO of. He looked around to find somebody that we could get, a big consultancy that we could go into. And we ended up at Deloitte. So I spent a year at Deloitte as a senior managing consultant. And what I realized after a year is that, first of all, I really didn't like Deloitte. I'm not a Deloitte person. For some people, it would be their dream job to work at Deloitte and to be to senior managing consultants, like 2 steps from partner. And to make partner is a very prestigious thing, and you get paid a huge amount of money, but it had no appeal to me whatsoever. It was too conventional, too corporate, too much about politics. And so I knew I had to get out. And that was when I decided I really wanted to kind of just work for myself forever. I basically declared I never want a job again for the rest of my life. And I managed to escape, which was what it felt like. And my plan was to consult independently as a contractor to companies like the BBC and other broadcasters, because that was my specialism. And what I did was, and it was a good lesson in how to get something you want, how to sell yourself, and it's something I write about in my new book. And I ran a campaign to get into the BBC. So I thought, I'm just going to focus on the BBC. They're doing the most interesting projects in this area of digital video. They're really nice people. I knew a lot of people at the BBC. It's really prestigious to put on my contract, on my CV, on my resume. And it's always been this sort of childhood dream. I know other people have dreams of being, I don't know, a rock star or something, but my dream is to work at the BBC. So it was quite exciting to think I would be walking into BBC Television Centre, which was an iconic building back then. And so I ran a campaign. I basically called everybody I knew in the BBC. I emailed everybody I knew. I asked everybody who was a vendor selling to the BBC. I asked everybody who previously worked for the BBC what projects they had. And I even read Broadcast Magazine and looked at the projects that the BBC were doing around innovation and technology and cold called those people. And about a month later, I'd actually left my job, so I had no income coming in. And I still hadn't really got anywhere. But then about month 2, I think it might have been 3 months actually, when I was starting to run out of money. But at that point, I actually finally got a call from somebody saying, it was from the broadcast centre at BBC. And he said, can you come in for an interview tomorrow? And I went in for an interview. I was actually in bed when he called me. And I went in for an interview and he said, great, can you start on Monday? And my job was to put together a request for proposals for a multi-million-pound project to digitize an enormous archive of content. And that was kind of that was my stepping stone, which is often quite a good way of getting yourself out of full-time employment. So that was a stepping stone towards self-employment. And I can talk about that if you'd like. I don't know if I'm if I'm talking for too long about one particular question.
No, it's amazing. So I would like to still on your profile. So when you at that peak that you left after BBC and all this work, when did you decide to start? Because you are a technologist by base, and as well with a fantastic experience in some of the leading companies in the world, and of course working for Disney might have been a fantastic experience, which is one of the leading companies as well, creative companies as well. But when did you decide to start becoming an author as well? Because you didn't touch that in your...
Yeah, so people do find this a bit weird. Like, how did you go from being an IT consultant to being, or a technology strategy consultant, whatever you might call me, to being an author and whatever it is you call me now, business coach, I guess, broadly. And for me, it felt quite a natural transition because I've been interested in psychology since I was reading those books on Freud and so on when I was 12 years old. And I was also really passionate about creativity. So I was very into music. I've been playing around making electronic music since I was about 18. I was interested in humor and comedy. I was into writing. So any kind of creative expression really interested me. And one of the things I did when I quit Deloitte is I signed up for this course. I did a few things actually. I signed up for a stand-up comedy course. And for 12 weeks in a basement of a comedy club in Soho in London, I practiced how to become a stand-up comic. And it ended with this live gig of where we all took it in turns to go on stage, and all our friends were in the audience. So it was a full comedy gig audience, but of fairly, good-natured people, because they were our friends and partners and whatever else, and family sometimes. And that was I think that was a really key experience. And ironically, I was on one of the last days of the course, I met this chap sitting next to me, and I said, "Where do you work?" And he said, "Deloitte." And I said, "Well, which building?" Because I'm in the Strand. And he goes, "I'm in the Strand." And I go, "Like, well, which section?" And he goes, "TMT, which is telecoms, media and technology." And I went, "Well, so am I." And we'd never met each other because he'd been on a project at a broadcaster in Scotland for the whole time. But we'd both gone from Deloitte to stand-up comedy. And I went off and started running events. I'll talk about it in a moment. And he started running a burlesque comedy club. So kind of risque. It was comedy, performance, some mild nudity, and all sorts of craziness. So that was quite a transition for both of us. And I think, but it's not a bad thing to do sometimes if you want to escape from your work and there's something you just want to do, like, wanted to explore comedy more, to just go and do it. And not everything has to turn into your career. There was a point when I was doing stand-up comedy gigs. I was doing, I did about a handful of gigs, and I went down pretty well. I'm pleased to say. One gig, I was terrible, but I think a few of them, went down really well, and I came close to going through to a competition on my second ever gig. And then I looked at what it took to become a successful stand-up comic. And what you had to do is, the people who succeeded, first of all, had just an incredible amount of they did have a lot of raw talent. I think I had maybe some mild raw talent. The people who end up on TV generally have a pretty good amount of raw talent, but they also, they are willing to do a gig every single night for no money in a room above a pub. But back then you could smoke in pubs in England. So they were pretty unpleasant places to be if you're not a smoker. And they would do 2 gigs a night. And then they would basically, when they ran out of all the clubs in London, and there's a lot of them, they'd get in the car after their first gig in London and drive to another city in the UK in order to perform another gig, because they wanted to do so many gigs and they wanted to break through. And those are the people who eventually, after several years, I saw cropping up on TV. So I thought, do I want to actually do this? I'd already written a couple of articles for newspapers. I'd written one about a kind of medical thing, but it was an interesting exploration of mortality and stuff like that. And then there was another one I'd written about, there was a kind of humorous story for the Reader's Digest. And I've been paid for both of those. And I thought I can either struggle to try and do comedy gigs, which felt like I was going to be doing the same material every night, which really bores me, or I could concentrate on writing and other things, and that could pay off straight away. And I didn't want the comedy badly enough to go through that pain barrier that those other people were, driving at 3 o'clock in the morning across the country to get back from another gig. And so I think it's completely appropriate for when you're thinking about your career and where you want to go like, maybe this could pay off, this comedy thing, or whatever it is I want to do. But I don't want to pay the price, because there's a price to everything. And I just didn't want to pay the price for comedy. Whether it would have gone somewhere or not, I don't know for sure. But I get as much enjoyment out of what I do now, and in some ways more, than I would have done from being a famous comic. Because a famous comic, like I say, mostly does the same. There was coined by a US author called Barbara Sher, and she died sadly earlier this year. But she wrote a number of books about this topic. And I wrote about scanners too in my new book. And a scanner is somebody with lots of ideas, lots of interests, likes starting things, not so good at finishing things, finds it difficult to focus, loves learning for the sake of learning. But as soon as you've got the basics of something, you get bored and you want to move on. So scanners always have 10 books on the go. They rarely finish any of them. And if it's tamed and if it's used constructively, then you can be very successful. If you think Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Oprah Winfrey, they're billionaires and they're all scanners. The bad version of being a scanner is you just never finish anything and you just dabble and you never go anywhere. So, which is why I've got a guide in my book about how to be a successful scanner. But I wanted to meet other people like me who didn't just want to do one thing for the rest of their lives, and just be an expert in one topic. And so I put a notice on one of Barbara Sher's bulletin boards, as it was back then, and invited people to meet me at a bar in London and talk about being a scanner. And 6 people turned up. One of them was a client, one of them was a friend, and then there are a few like randoms off the internet. And that was the first ever Scanners Night. And then over time, it became this formal event where we had speakers, a bit like TED Talks. But they were themed on how to be creative, how to manage multiple projects, how to be successful when you have very wide variety of interests. And because it was because it was what I call super niched in my books, it meant that it was interesting to people. I mean, it was a room, it was a very nice room below a restaurant. And we had interesting speakers, but there are many, many events like that in London, particularly now. Because it had this funny little twist about being for scanners and it being called Scanners Night, it ended up attracting a lot of press. Now, back then, I didn't think to hire a PR person, but without even doing that, we ended up in a couple of national newspapers and a couple of glossy magazines. So, and we had up to 80 people, and we started off free, and I ended up charging something for it. And it was a lot of fun to join. It was a good networking thing, a little bit like, running a podcast is for me now. So I run a podcast of my own. And it was a lot of fun. We ran it for about 5 or 6 years, and I felt like it had run its course. And I think the combination of running Scanners Night, doing comedy, doing a couple of freelance articles, getting really interested in how to help creative people have a good life. I qualified in 2003 as a life coach. And then I also started training I did the sort of main training pieces that you do as a psychotherapist in humanistic psychotherapy, but without being on a formal training track. So I didn't see clients and pass exams or whatever. So, but I was fascinated by psychotherapy, and that had a big impact on me. And the combination of all these things attracted me a book deal. So for anybody who's thinking like, how do I get a book deal? My advice is usually to attract one. And you attract one by, you've written several books, Dinis, but if you hadn't by now, somebody probably would have come to you and said, hey, do you want to write a book? So in some ways, that's a better way to do things than to just go and try and win one, because it just works out a lot better, because it means you've got the platform then to promote the book. It means you're not just an average punter going in cold to a publisher. It means that you've got more material to put in your book because you've been living and breathing that topic. So that's what ended up as my first book with, it was actually a book originally about scanners, and then it became a book about play. And, but in all the different meanings of the word play. And so I eventually came up with this title, Screw Work, Let's Play, which is this book, which came out in 2010. And it's about how to do what you love and get paid for it. And it sounds a bit fanciful. It's not really about not working. It's really screw the 9 to 5. It's screw conventional work. And it's really about how to do something you love in a way that the world is happy to pay you for, and finding that sweet spot between the two. And it includes lots of stuff about marketing, but also about how to manage your own mindset, how to get inspired, how to find out what you want to do. Because the biggest problem, particularly with people like me with lots of ideas and interests, is trying to work out what you want to do. Never mind, trying to make it happen is relatively simple. It's just a bunch of stuff. It's just like, it's a to-do list of call this person, email this person, and whatever it is. Some of those things might be scary, but it's often simpler than the existential question of what am I here for and what do I really want to do? And the new book that's coming out in August 2020 is a rebooted version of that first book. I did another one in between called Screw Work, Break Free, which is about how to launch a business or a money-making idea in 30 days. But the new one is called Fuck Work, Let's Play, with 2 asterisks in the F word. And we beefed it up because I originally toyed with the idea of calling it that title and pulled back a bit because it was a little strong back in 2010. But now it seems appropriate. And it's making a very strong point, which is that everything you've been taught about work in conventional careers and by the education system is disabling you. And so, you know, swearing is appropriate. And for those people who really hate boring work and hate the 9 to 5 and hate, you know, instead of Deloitte being your dream job, it's just a kind of, I mean, it's interesting and it's exciting and challenging, but it's just a really bad fit and you don't want to be there. Then that book is for people like that. People for whom it's not just about money, because if I just wanted money, I could have tried to climb the ladder at Deloitte. It's for people like me for whom self-expression is as important as getting paid well. I mean, I like money as much as anybody, but if I'm not enjoying it and don't feel like I don't have freedom and the ability to tell my story and to express who I am and be creative and have fun, then there's no point doing it for me.
So I want to touch on that particular because this is, and I think that's what I love about your work is this kind of, first of all, a sense of looking at the life balance and as well as strategical way of owning your own personal narrative and your own career. And I think this is a big challenge, probably the biggest challenge for the future of work and the present state of humanity, because what we have right now, especially with the inception of COVID-19 and everything that happening around technology, is that we have people using all the technology, and everyone is using technology, even the ones that don't say they use it, they end up using some television or some phone or whatever the stuff. But the challenge is that people don't know how to make money out of this data, out of the things they're creating. And secondly, and I think that's what your books highlight a lot, is that it's very difficult to do what you did. You took a career that is a very successful career in technology, working for some of the leading companies in the world, and you decided to go and reinvent yourself as an author, as a thought leader, as a coach, and as well building all of that. You need to get out of your comfort zone, get on the edge money-wise, and creating all of this. But at the same time, what I feel, even as a teacher and been teaching in business schools, is that the universities are not preparing people to have their own autonomy in terms of personal development, in terms of personal brand, and all these areas that you speak about in your books. And I think this is the critical element for the future of our society, especially as we automate society, work, and a lot of other things. So how do you see this, and what would be, of course, people can read your books and that's the idea, but how would be like the metrics, and as well about the concept of scanner and these different concepts? I would like to elaborate a bit on that.
Well, I come up with this term that I use in the new book, but it was originally introduced in the second one, which is the worker bot. And I realized that now education's changed since I was at school, I would hope, but not that much is the feel I get. When you go to school, you go and you're asked questions, and there's often only one right answer. And you put your hand up and you hope that you're right, and you're either right or you're wrong. And, you have to kind of, obviously we need to socialize children. We can't have them running around still screaming when they get into, middle age or something. So we have to socialize children, but in the process, we can crush their innate spirit. So somebody said that we're actually all natural entrepreneurs when we're 4 years old, because when we want something, we start scheming for how to get it. So as long as we've had a healthy upbringing, we haven't already had our spirit crushed, which is always possible in some families. But as long as that hasn't happened, if we want something, you see children, even if it isn't a good idea, but they stick it in their mouth, they'll grab it and they'll stick it in their mouth. And they don't know to interrupt that process. And then as they get older, they get more sophisticated, they start thinking like, okay, how can I bring mum and dad around to get what I want? And so it's a natural part of who kids are. And then the problem with school is you're taught like, well, you have to put your hand up even to go to the toilet, and you have to kind of ask permission to do this or that. And your take on the world, I think this is, hopefully this is a bit better now, where schooling does encourage you to have your own personal opinions on things that actually are open to interpretation. I would hope that is the case, but it's still largely a question of right or wrong. And then you get into employment, and what happens is you either get the job or you don't. You either get the promotion or you don't. So it's very digital. It's very 1 or 0. And entrepreneurship doesn't work anything like that. Nothing like that. And school and employment doesn't prepare you for it at all. And it actually harks. There's another thing about it, which is that it harks back to, when I first got really excited as an older person in my 30s about psychotherapy. I read a lot of Carl Rogers, who had this thing called the person-centered approach. He was really a pioneer in counseling and psychotherapy in the 1950s and 60s. And he was also very interesting because he did proper scientific trials on therapy, which still hasn't been done very much. And he was a pioneer in that as well. What really works for helping people be happier, be more functional, whatever. And he had this idea about an internal locus of control. So it's generally accepted now that a healthy person has an internal locus of reference, with meaning you refer to yourself first and foremost for whether you think something is right or wrong, whether you want to do something or not. You're able to check in and go, do I want this job? Do I want this promotion? Do I think I'd enjoy that? Do I, even if my parents completely disapprove of my career choice, for instance, I know inside me that I don't want to be a doctor, for instance, but I want to do something else. And that is a very mentally healthy place to be. And school does not help engender that, I don't think, unless it's changed radically in the last few decades. I don't think it's changed enough. Because one of the things you do with kids is you take very young children, and you make them sit still, and you disconnect them from their body. So their body becomes like a brain taxi, as a friend of mine called it the other day, who works in embodiment. And that very much happened to me. And so once you're disconnected from your body, you actually don't know how you feel, because the feelings happen in your body. They're not a thing happening in your head. And so if you're not connected to your overall organism, which is the phrase the word that Carl Rogers used, it's very difficult for you to steer your way through life. And the job of being an entrepreneur is to bring that locus of reference back into you. So it's like, what do I really want? How am I going to do it? What do I think is the ethical way to market myself? What do I think is the ethical way to run my business? Referencing all the people outside. It's not that you completely tune out, because it's not about being a psychopath. It's like, you have to pay attention to what's going on in the world outside and what the feedback you're getting. But it's the ability to say, this is what I want. And then it's also self-agency. So it's about becoming an entrepreneur requires that you are able to make things, to manifest things in your life, to make things happen. And that, again, is not a skill that I see taught in school. And so it's like, okay, I have a problem. For instance, I want to get a book deal. I don't know anybody in publishing. I don't know a literary agent. Well, you can either at that point go, well, forget it, then there's no point. Or you can start Googling, how do I get a book deal? You can start thinking like, didn't a friend of mine back at school end up an author? Can I call them and have a coffee with them? And that's how an entrepreneur thinks. And I think being a large-scale entrepreneur requires a whole different set of skills of people management and finance management. But to get started in entrepreneurship, just to say a solo entrepreneur, all you really need is that stuff. You need the mindset of being able to decide what you want to do and make things happen in the world, and to be able to see an obstacle and work your way around it, and work your way over it, and call in help to do so. And the biggest job I see, everyone thinks that to be an entrepreneur, you need to learn some really clever marketing skills. I don't think that's the case. I mean, it helps. I mean, I've learned a lot about marketing and it is really helpful. But the biggest job, you can Google that stuff. The hardest work is it's like turning a tanker around 180 degrees. And it's from that external locus of reference to the internal locus of reference, and waiting for other people to give you permission for things to happen. Like, miss, can I go to the toilet? Or, can I have a pay rise? Asking your boss, to making shit happen. And that is a very different way of operating. And some people are born like that. So, those like Richard Branson apparently came out of the womb like that. I mean, some people obviously seem to have that skill set. I had to learn it. I was very, very passive when I was younger, which is why it's interesting to me. It's fascinating to consider how you engender that in somebody.
So this is kind of, for me, and I think you made a lot of points that are really critical from the lack of having these skill sets in our education system, to, like you said, the sense of understanding entrepreneurship, but as well demystifying a lot of the problems. Like you said, I think even being a teacher myself, although I don't teach much nowadays, is that what I found is that the universities are facing as well a big dilemma, is that, of course, most of them, of course, want to answer to these questions and of course coming up with solutions for these special business schools and so forth. But the challenge is that people are framed in a way that is killing their creativity and entrepreneurship. And this is actually, for me, probably the biggest challenge, and in relationship with the digital transformation. So in your new book, Fuck Work, Let's Play, how to do what you love and get paid for, I think you're going to elaborate more what you discussed in the second one. So I want to look at the frame, and I know that people will have access to the book in the near time, and probably this interview will be for the future, so they will have access to the book when at least in the second stage of when the interview is released. So my point is that how can we effectively benchmark this, but as well in a way that we can actually get out of this, is like a box that we are all in a box, and get out of the box, but at the same time coming up with creativity ways to make money, because that's the main point. And I think your book is precisely do what you love and get paid for. Because, for instance, you are right now an author and a successful as well coach and thought leader, but you had all this trajectory that made who you are. But people are challenged. At the moment, for instance, there's a study that 200 million people plus are getting right now in serious problems with COVID-19, and in the case of going to extreme poverty. In the US alone, I think it's around 30 to 50 million people that are getting out of job, in the UK as well. So how do you go from the nitty-gritty of the theory to the practice, and as well coming up with something that actually can create some security, psychological, because doing what you love, it's wonderful, but, and you know that, and me as well, but you have to do a huge amount of work, a huge amount of persistence, and a huge amount of resilience. So I want to go to your book that is precisely F Work, Let's Play, how to do what you love and get paid for it. I really want to highlight this, because this title is key. Do what you love and get paid for it.
Well, the heart of the book is actually a quote that's over 2,000 years old, and it's from Aristotle. And I don't know if I can remember it exactly off the top of my head, but it's something like, where your great joy and the world's needs meet, there lies your vocation. So the job is, I'm not a fan of the do what you love and the money will come. That's actually a title of a book from the 70s or something, 80s. I'm not a fan of that, because there's no reason why. I like watching The Simpsons, but I could watch Simpsons all day. No one's going to hand me a check for it. You have to find a way to do something you love in a way that meets a need for other people. So it can get very narcissistic. This one end of that do what you love conversation can get very narcissistic, I think. And I'm not a fan of that. And it's about finding that marriage between the two. Now, if there are things you want to do that aren't going to get you paid, do them as a hobby. Like if you want to do stand-up comedy, then it's really hard to get paid. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Do it like in your spare time. Do a gig every week. Spend all your weekends doing gigs, but then have something that makes you money for your job, and or for your, as an entrepreneur. And what's exciting about this moment in time, and the reason why the book does have such a strong title, is like there is so much opportunity now because of technology, as you've been talking about, Dinis, to make money in so many different ways. It didn't exist. I mean, even part of the reason I needed to completely rewrite the book is because technology's moved on. I mean, Instagram didn't exist 10 years ago. Twitter was this new, quite funky thing that had just happened. And so we hadn't even had the whole, Facebook dominating the world and the various scandals. And so the world's changed an awful lot. And there is, if you are determined, there's always a way of making a living doing something you love. It doesn't mean necessarily, if you love playing guitar, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get paid as a full-time guitarist. But there is if you think of it like a Venn diagram, one circle is all the things you love, and one circle's all the stuff that the world's happy to pay you for. And the intersection between them is where you want to focus. In fact, there's a slightly more complex version of the book called the 3 Ps of play, profit, and practice. But some things are much easier to monetize than others. And, for instance, music and art is not impossible, but it's much tougher for reasons that are explained in the book. And so you need to think about, okay, how much work am I willing to put in? Like, I ruled out stand-up comedy partly for that reason. And if I can find something that's just as much fun for me, but gets me paid much better, then I'm going to do that. In fact, personally, that's my choice. And everyone takes their point along that line of where you want to be. And technology is just, that's why I was so excited when I first wrote the first version of the book, because I don't think people really realized what we had in front of us, all the tools we had. I think it's better known now, because we all have a friend who's sort of relentlessly marketing themselves on whatever platform of choice, social media platform we have. And it's like, they're probably doing it in quite an irritating way. So we're quite aware that people are doing that, but you can do that hopefully in a more, there are so many platforms and so many ways for you to get the word out, in the way that you have done, Dinis, with this amazing podcast, where in quite a short amount of time, you've got huge listenership. And if you do that in the right way, by hitting a need people really have, of being really specific, I'm a big fan of super niching and saying, I'm going to do this one thing really, really well. And for this kind of person, it is like Scanners Night, the event I ran. It's going to be a dream come true. And for 90% of the population, they don't care. But that still leaves me 1 billion people, or, 500 million, or whatever it might be. There's still a lot of people sloshing around who fit my super niche. So I think that's the key. Think about what is the real need that you can satisfy, and avoid. People tend to get into trouble when they fall into one of two camps. One is they don't want to think about the real world and what people are willing to pay for. They just want to do what they love, and just, there's a kind of narcissism around that. And then at the other end of the scale, that's okay. By the way, if you want to, you can do that if you want to. You can't complain that it took a long time to break through as a musician, because it does. So, just know what you're going into. I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from doing anything. At the other end of the scale, there's no point even trying to find a job I like. All jobs are miserable. I remember my brother saying that to me when I was about 15. It's like, thanks for the motivational speech, David. And no, I was a bit older than that. I think I was 20 something. And a lot of people think that, like, all jobs are miserable, or all work is miserable. All work is something you don't want to do. I take the piss a little bit out of Tim Ferriss in my book, because he wrote this book, The 4-Hour Workweek, became very well known around the same time I wrote my first book, a little bit before. And his premise is kind of like an old school version of, you're obviously not going to like your work, so let's create a business that can get you paid in 4 hours a week, and then you can do what you really want to do. But Tim doesn't do that. Tim does exactly what he wants to do, and he's really well off, and he loves everything he does. He doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do. So he's living the message of fuck work, let's play, not the 4-hour work week. But I mean, I actually quite like his book, so I'm not rubbishing him at all. I think he's a very interesting guy. But that's an old model of work, which is like, you're obviously going to hate it. So the dream is to either have a 4-hour, passive income, which almost completely doesn't exist, or I want to win the lottery and sit on the beach and drink cocktails. And what I say in the book is like, well, after 3 months of sitting on the beach drinking cocktails, what are you going to do then? Because do you not think that's going to get a bit boring? Like, assuming you're not 20 years old now and you just want to party all the time, what do you actually want to do with your life? Don't you want to do something? You want to, create a project. You want to, build your own house. You want to write a book. You want to change the world in some way. You want to run a campaign. It could be anything. And it's good to start sometimes with that blank canvas. There's an exercise in the book about if you had a year off, like if I handed you a year's salary right now, and if your salary is not good, then let's have 50% on top. So now you're comfortable and you've got a blank check for any materials you need. What would you do with it? And it's a good question to ask, because the answer to that probably is a clue to where you should guide your life as much as possible. And, for me, I'd be doing I'd be talking about ideas. I'd be writing. I'd be helping people. Even if I was doing it for free, I'd be meeting people for lunch and talking over their business ideas and getting excited about how to spin the marketing angle or whatever it might be, or how they could make more money by changing the business model or something like that. And that's just fun for me, but that's actually my work. So I'm not saying every moment is bliss. There are days when I think like, oh God, that's a chore. I've got to do some financial thing or something or other. And there are days when there's too much to do. That's for sure. But other than that, the actual core of my work is stuff I want to be doing. And so now I don't want to downplay, by the way, the fact that there are people in a real financial mess right now. So I don't want to be too glib about that. That is a horrible place to be. And so, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. And if you're in the West and you've got, you've got a set of skills, the good news is there are ways of you making money right away. I mean, yes, you might want to go apply for a job as soon as possible. That might be the best option for you. But you can also, if there's a way you can just get paid straight away, if you go, look, I've got great graphic skills. I've got great marketing skills from this corporation job. I've got great management skill, whatever it might be. Maybe somebody can just hire me and at least start paying me something straight away. And that could be the start of a career that's much more fulfilling. And I think it's Tim O'Reilly who says, head of O'Reilly Publishing, is a really interesting guy. And he said he doesn't believe this idea that technology will make everyone unemployed, because he says when you solve one problem, he just creates another problem. It's like, now I've got this beautiful laptop which solves all sorts of problems for me, this computer laptop. Now I need a case for it. Who's making the case for my beautiful Apple laptop? Now I've got my AirPods and I keep losing them. Can someone design a case for my Apple AirPods that's better? But there's always as soon as you got an iPhone and it did everything you could ever imagine you ever wanted to do, then people say like, well, now you're overwhelmed with the apps. Let's create an app that organizes your apps. There's always a problem, right? There's always a frustration in life. There's always a way for life to be better. And every one of those things is an opportunity for you to get paid.
So I want to touch that specific area, because I think with COVID-19, we have right now it's the first global acceleration of digital transformation. And as well, we have a challenge that, let's say, people like us, this is nothing new, because we've been doing this for ages, working remotely, working from any place in the world, whatever you are. And as well, like you said, making a balance between your passion, but as well working on it. Because like you said, one thing is seeing Netflix all day, that might be a passion, but that doesn't make any money. And I think this is a big challenge, I think, especially for everyone in the world. It's that how do you balance your passion as well to the work balance, and as well family and everything and all the values that you do? Because people effectively spend hours and hours on television, Netflix and all these things, and nothing wrong about it. But if you just do that, of course, your life becomes very miserable. But I think there's as well another additional problem that I think your book partly answers, but I would like to have your opinion, is that people right now, especially the ones that have a frustrating job, that they have things they don't like, they are using the COVID-19 as an excuse not to work. Okay, and this is becoming a big problem. Actually, I was in a conference last week with actually some leading personalities worldwide when I was speaking in a panel. And one of the people, actually one of the most influential people in technology in the world, was precisely saying that, okay, how can we actually make the passion to work, but as well this balance, because this is a big challenge. And I think this touches exactly why your title is provocative, but as well quite exciting as well, because, okay, you really need to look at work and play in a balance, okay? And as well, how to monetize that life balance, because of course, most of the people work just to meet the ends, and as well, they are distracted with all the different things that we have, and they don't focus. So I think the focus, the persistence, and the resilience is the critical element that I see, especially when it comes to what you discuss in your books, and as well, all your approach towards work balance. And I agree with you. I think Tim Ferriss in the 4-Hour book, it's mostly a frame, and I think the frame is a bit contradictory with his lifestyle, because he works a lot, but he works in what he does, both as an investor and other things. It's someone that I respect a lot, and I hope to have in this podcast in the near future. So, but I think the most important thing is, okay, this balance between this, like you said, play, work, monetize, and make the balance on that. How do you see that, especially someone that achieved that? And of course, you are a global personality in that area, but really the layers, because the devil is on details. And I think, like you said, if you want to be a musician, successful musician, you imply years and years of professional, and you need to go to YouTube and promote yourself and be all over the internet. And as another thing that I want to touch as well, and sorry, it's probably a big question, but I want to touch that, is the lack of digital people. So everyone uses digital 24/7, but even in my team, that I have a team almost all younger than me, they're all terrible on social media. And I tell that to everyone. But it's the point is that how the hell you can actually be in a world that is digital and not using social media for your own, to promote yourself, just to know how to use it. Very few people have more than 50 followers on Twitter, much less on Instagram. And this is something that scares me, because if you don't nurture these numbers, and if you don't know how to use these tools, you have no chance. and unless you are very lucky to work for a corporate, because you just got in the corporate ledger. But even on that, if something works bad, you're going to be fired, and you're going to be replaced by something automated. So I want to touch this it's a lot of things, but I want to provoke you a bit on that.
Well, I think, I'm not sure whether it's about the question or not, but I agree with your premise that I think we're seeing an acceleration because of COVID. So this is part of why I think there's going to be a new wave of entrepreneurship, because multiple drivers, some people have had time, they've been furloughed in the UK, they've been paid not to work. And some of the people have used that time, and they've had nothing else, have had thinking space. I know plenty of people who bought courses and worked through courses during that time, if nothing else. And I think also a lot of people have been forced to work remotely, to set themselves up, to use Zoom. And that's, I've traveled all over the world, and I normally spend a month or two out of the UK in the winter, working from Bali or Thailand or something. I wrote the new book in Thailand, on an island called Koh Lanta, because England's pretty miserable in the winter, and it goes on for about 6 months. So that was very familiar to me. For a lot of people, that's quite a wild idea, and they'd never worked at home very much, and they never worked remotely, and it was quite jarring, which I do appreciate. It was very jarring for them to suddenly be in such a different situation. But now they've got that, and they've used Zoom, and they've realized, actually, I've been saying it for 10 years, but finally people are going like, all I need is my laptop and my brain, and I can work from anywhere. Because most of us who are doing what you might call middle class jobs, it's just the contents of our brain we're selling anyway. It's like there's nothing else. We're not doing it with our hands for the large part. So I think there will be an acceleration. I think that the couple of other factors. One is that people have realized that I don't want to be beholden to a single source of income, which is my boss, because having a job is like people think self-employment is risky, but having a job is like being self-employed, but with only one client. And so when they get into trouble, that's it. You lose your entire source of income. And so I think people have realized that. And I think also there's been a shock factor. It's been quite traumatic to see the world change so shockingly around COVID. And, there was a period when no one was going outside. I found it very disturbing. And I think that has maybe jostled people a bit, because we've had a pretty easy life globally. I'm not saying individually, people have had all sorts of terrible things happen, but globally for the past, I don't know, when was the last, 9/11 was the last really traumatic thing that happened, I think, globally. Certainly from a Western perspective. If you were in the Middle East, I think you would have a different perspective. But because there's been a lot of stuff partly caused by the West over there. But then there's going back, the Second World War was the last really, really shocking thing. Other than that, it's been plain sailing globally, in sort of global politics for the last 20 years. So it's been very shocking to suddenly, be faced with our own mortality and to hear about people dying of this thing, which transmits like a cold. And so I think that's shaken people up. And I think the combination of all those things means we're going to have we won't see the effect of it for a year or two, but a little while later, we're going to see people really doing some very interesting things who started during lockdown. So I think that's part of it. What else? I got lost. So what else were you asking about?
I think about the digital transformation, because like you said, like you mentioned, you need PR, you need the tools on social media, you need to nurture these things in order to build a career like yours. And in order to come up to the stage that we are. And as well, this is not a simple task. It implies, for instance, in my case for this podcast, there's a small team behind it that I have to invest. There's a lot of work to get the views. This doesn't happen by accident. And even on this, Facebook and YouTube keep on screwing up the YouTube and changing the algorithms, and they don't care less about how much users you have. They will just screw you up if they're not getting what they have. Actually, we have this week in end of July, precisely the US grilling on the big players of social media and technology. But I think the challenge is really to nurture these tools, and to learn how to use these tools is critical to make money. And I want to touch that because it's the nitty gritty. And I think that's what you highlight in your books, and especially in the previous one, the new one, I know that is going to come. But I want to understand this level of the tools, how to use the tools, and how to use the process to get this.
Well, people describe me as very well connected, which I'm more surprised when people say that. But it happened organically. I don't do any kind of cheesy networking. I don't think. There's a certain level of awareness. I was sitting next to one of the editors of a Sunday Times Style magazine at dinner once, and realized that she was interested in the book I was writing, which is my first book. And I thought, okay, I should probably not screw up this conversation. And it turned. She ended up listing it as one of the 6 buzz books of the summer. And so it's not like I'm completely naive about who's important to talk to, but I don't really plot and think I should network, or I don't even think I should have lots of followers. There's some awareness of that. But what I do is I like sharing my journey on social media. So this is a good strategy. Sharing your journey on social media and sharing who you are and being reasonably authentic about it, and being some version of yourself, which a lot of people are very scared to be, I think really pays off. And I know lots of authors, I know lots of people, I know quite a few journalists, and I know all sorts of interesting people. And it's a very useful thing when suddenly you start a podcast or something like that and you want to interview them. And so I think my advice, first of all, is do what you want to do, which is like, if you're really interested in a subject, say you're in a job right now, and maybe you worry about losing it, or maybe you just want to get out, and you want to really establish yourself, possibly as a contractor or a consultant, or start a business in some area. Just start talking to those people who you find interesting. So the people I follow on Twitter are people I find absolutely fascinating. I've got this list now, which is mostly about people who share interesting things about the coronavirus, which are evidence-based, but reasonably optimistic. So I've got a kind of filtered list because I'm capable of being very pessimistic, particularly about health stuff. And so I deliberately filter what I read. And I read a lot of Scott Adams and Paul Graham, Naval Ravikant, and a couple of other people. Elon Musk is quite entertaining, although a bit nutty on Twitter. And so those people normally have a kind of optimistic view of life generally, but they also believe in reality, because I have no time for silly conspiracy theories and just wildly wishful thinking. And in fact, I run a Facebook group called Humanity versus Corona, which is themed on that. And so if people like science, but also want the positive version of the current science and not hear the doom stories, that's a good place to go join. And I think you can just kind of do what you want to do and pursue your interests, and you will build a following around that. So I've not really tried. There's only 100 people in Humanity versus Corona, and I don't really care, because it serves my purpose, which is there's one place I can share all the good news from science, the progress on vaccines, on treatments, even things, evidence-backed natural health stuff that's really been proven to work. And anyone who wants to join that can join. And I have that similar philosophy for everything. So I follow all these people on Twitter, like Paul Graham and stuff, and James Altucher, who's an author and entrepreneur, and they, James Altucher followed me back the other day, and I'm used to Twitter for a while, so it was like, oh yeah, I've forgotten. That's the exciting thing about Twitter. People you really love and respect actually follow you back if you look like you might be interesting too. And then I asked him some advice about my book cover, and he actually gave me some really good advice about the book cover for the new book. And that's something that's so exciting on social media. And all of us can do this. And you can do it without being some sleazy networker of like, what am I going to get out of this? It's like, I like James Altucher, I like Paul Graham, I like whoever it might be. Why wouldn't I want to have them on my podcast, or follow them on Twitter, or comment on something funny they've written, or something interesting they've written? And that's actually the best kind of networking. So that's my suggestion. And I think you can choose your platform of choice, because I resonate with Facebook mostly. I know there aren't any young people on Facebook, but Facebook just kind of works for me. I think it's the slickest platform. Everything about it works. And I gave up on Twitter for a long time. I went back to Twitter recently because it's the best place for real-time news around the coronavirus and stuff, and scientists and stuff like that. And I also thought, I did actually make a point of following some journalists and seeing if I could make connections to journalists. That was a deliberate bit of networking around the book. But mostly I've just been using it for coronavirus stuff. And so you need to find out what it is for you. Like, I don't particularly chime with Instagram, so I don't use it very much. But for you, you might do. And whatever your platform is, use it and just connect with people and try and be yourself. And there's some advice about social media stuff in the book, which includes, I think I reference Gary Vaynerchuk, who people might have heard of, who's a big social media guru. And he says something really important. He doesn't explain it terribly well, unfortunately. He sort of comes up with these catchphrases, and then he's not that great at explaining himself sometimes. But he had this thing called document, don't create. And what he means by that is the old school version of self-marketing was you write these beautiful thought pieces on your blog or on Medium or whatever it might be. Or you have to say something really profound or, significant or new. But in actual fact, people are as interested in you as a person as anything else. So Paul Graham, who I mentioned, he's the co-founder of Y Combinator, which is the most respected startup incubator in the world. I've quoted him in my books. And he's brilliant at explaining how value creation works, the broader topic of how you create a business. And the other day, he told a funny little story with his 8-year-old. And I tweeted him and said, oh my God, it sounds like you've turned into Homer Simpson. And he actually kind of laughed at that. And those little interactions are as important as anything else in social media. So social media is just people being people, but with electricity. It's kind of how I put it once. It's just you doing you online if you do it right. And if you do, so it's really about who you are and being able to be a bit more open and share your journey. So you might, for instance, if you're starting a business, share your journey to start a business and say, like, I'm starting a business about this, not even completely formed exactly how this is going to work. If you want to follow along with me, you can do, and look over my shoulder as I make tons of mistakes. And as soon as I work things out that work, I'm going to share it with you. That's a very compelling story for people to tune into. It requires a certain amount of vulnerability. And again, we are taught never to be vulnerable in school, because if you are, it doesn't go well generally if you admit your weaknesses in front of the class. So it's an alien thing for us to do from the education system and from the office as well. It's not good to show your vulnerabilities in the office and say, I'm really anxious about my job right now. That's people don't normally say that in the middle of the office. But it's actually entirely appropriate to say on social media, if you want to be authentic, and say, I've got a big meeting today. I've got to admit, I'm really nervous. I'm meeting a hero of mine. I want to interview them for this blog, this podcast, or whatever it is. I'm going to them, or maybe they've promised to meet me for coffee and give me advice about how to get my business off the ground. But I'm really nervous about this meeting. People love that because everyone's been there. So I think everybody can do that. And I think that's a very authentic way of being. I think Gary Vaynerchuk, that's kind of what he's shooting at. It document, don't create. You can also curate content that you're learning. So what I'm doing with Humanity versus Corona, it's nothing to do with my business in this case. None of my business has to do with, healthcare or anything. But what I'm doing is I'm just curating a certain kind of content. And so if you follow me if you've joined that group in Facebook, what you'll get is a certain curated feed about the coronavirus, which is basically going to make you feel good. That's the aim of it. It's like, this is the latest breakthrough. And I do have quite an optimistic view about coronavirus. I think we will have a vaccine. There's a fair chance we'll have a vaccine by the end of the year. And I think we have learned so much about virology in this process that it's really exciting. And I read at the beginning of this whole fiasco, somebody said, virology is where bacteriology was 100 years ago. So this is before we had any antibiotics, and where if you had an operation, there was a fair chance you were going to die because you were getting an infection and there's nothing they could do. Maybe it was a bit longer. I don't know when antibiotics were invented. It was about 100 years, a bit longer. And virology was in the same place. It's like, oh, you got a virus. Let's hope you live. It was kind of all we had to give people. We maybe had we could support them and stuff. And there are a couple of antivirals, but very, very limited. And now the whole world has been working on this one thing for 6 months, and if not more. And we have brought forward our thinking on virology wonderfully far. So that's kind of my positive view on the coronavirus. And I think we will, for various reasons, we probably won't have another second peak that's as bad as the first peak. America is a rule of its. I don't know what America's doing, but it ain't very smart. And I don't know what's going to happen in America. But I think in the rest of the world, we will avoid having a second wave that is larger or even as large as the first, simply because we've learned so much stuff. And so it's not going to be like 1918, the Spanish flu. So I share that kind of stuff, and that's another passion of mine. That's the problem of being a scanner, right? You can never really focus. But I'm not surprised if some of the people who are in Humanity versus Corona end up reading about that and then see I run this free thing called that you mentioned, the 5-day business startup challenge. And then they join that, and then they end up paying for one of my courses, for the Pioneer program or something. So I'm not deliberately trying to do that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that actually happened anyway.
So can you tell us precisely about the 5-day business startup challenge, and as well the Ideas Lab, which is 2 separate projects? I would like to hear from both of them.
Yeah, so the Ideas Lab is my company, and that's what was founded. Really got going probably at the beginning it was 2005, so it's about 15 years ago. And it's kind of accelerating over the past year or two. And this year has been really, really good. It's not a big company. It's basically me and a supporting team, a little bit like you're talking about, Dinis, with the podcast. An assistant and a community manager and a PR person and a couple of other people, finance people and planning people and so on. And what we do is we help people create a unique business and brand around themselves. So often people who are creating initially a very small business that's really just them or them and some, people helping around them, not necessarily a big business. And some of those small businesses, as I show in Fuckwork Let's Play, some of those small businesses that were just like that, who embodied the principles I've talked about, and I interviewed them 10 years ago, they're now running serious international businesses that have got big brands, a dozen or more staff, and are global players in their area. And there's some just cracking stories in the book that are really entertaining. Some really quirky businesses that went on to be very powerful forces in their field. And so the Ideas Lab is about helping people go from an idea. We actually have a course. If you don't have an idea, we have a course called Idea Breakthrough to help you find an idea. But otherwise, the primary thing we do is help people go from an idea to making money out of it and then starting to scale it up. And the primary thing, the paid program, is called the Pioneer Program. And we've had, actually, I don't know how many people we have now because I haven't counted recently, but it's somewhere between 50 and 100 people, I think, have done the Pioneer Program now. And I've had many other courses that were earlier forms of that over the years. So we've had thousands of people go through my paid programs in the past and start something that they are really excited about. We get a lot of freelancers and consultants who want to create a unique brand around what they do. We also get people who just have an idea. They want to create an online business, maybe a course or something. And sometimes they have an idea it's usually based around their ideas and expertise. So that's our sweet spot. Though I do deal with people who have other ideas like startups and apps and stuff, because I've got a history there. And one of the other things we do is the 5-day business startup challenge, which is free. We've got one on the 10th of August, but we run them about every 6 weeks or so. So anyone who's listened to this can always go and find it at theideaslab.org and look for the 5-day challenge. And the idea of that is it's really good fun. We had 800 people on the previous one. We've had up to 1,000, I think. 2,500 people in total have taken it. We've run it. We started it this year and we've run it, I think, 3 or 4 times now. And the concept of it is that we're going to help you find an idea and actually start to put it out to the world and test it out in 5 days. And you get a little lesson every morning on video of me going through a principle. One of the key ones is, what is the need you're fulfilling? We have a particular exercise around that that's incredibly revealing, that really will show whether your business has legs or not, or whether it's just something fanciful. And then we go on to how do you start to market it or market yourself in order to get traction in that way we were talking about earlier. And then how do you start to spread the word and possibly even get your first sale? We had some people actually, make thousands of pounds or euros in the course of the 5-day challenge before. So people can find out about the 5-day business startup challenge at the Ideas Lab website. And it's really good fun. And for me, I think it's a good principle. Effectively, it's a marketing vehicle because a certain proportion of those people who do the free course then join the Pioneer Program and pay to do that. But for me, there's lots of different ways, lots of different marketing models we could use. But this one suits my personality. I used to have parties, much to my mother's horror, when I was 18. And I would just invite everybody because I always knew, not because I was amazingly popular, but I was friends of lots of different cliques because I had this sort of weird, multifaceted personality. And then I would invite them and then all the cliques would turn up at Sixth Form College when we were like between 16 and 18. I ended up with like 80 people in our house. It's absolutely horrified my mum. And to me, the principle of a good party is just get interesting people together and then get out of the way almost. It's like you don't really need to do much. It's like a nuclear reaction. It's kind of just take the control rods out and things will happen. So you can tell I studied physics. And then the 5-day challenge is a little bit like that, the 5-day business startup challenge. We just get people in there and we have some lessons, but it's fun because there's a buzz about it. It's really entertaining and people really enjoy it. We get amazing feedback about it. And so it's lovely to be able to do something that is fun to deliver, completely free of charge, has a big impact for people, and, you know, converts for people, converts for us as a company, and gets us, buyers of the things that are paid. So it's a good principle for anyone. Like, what is the marketing medium that suits you naturally?
Completely. So it's been 1 hour now, so I'm going to wrap up. So John, there's a lot of things here. There's a lot of summaries, and I think your book speak for itself. As a final notes, what would be the best ways? You mentioned your Facebook that is more restricted, but you have a lot of places where people can find about you. So what would be the channels when someone that wants to get into the Ideas Lab more? That's the website, but as well in your network events, where they can find you? What are the places where they actually can connect with you besides, of course, what is in the internet?
Yeah, so if you go to theideaslab.org, that's my website for the company. You can find the 5-day business startup challenge on there and join that for free. You can also join the email list to hear about what we're doing every week. Aside from that, I'm quite active on Facebook on my personal profile. So if you can find the right John Williams, then it's not necessarily easy. Then you can find me. And I'm on Instagram as John W. London. I'm on Twitter as John S. W. And I think those are probably the primary things. The book, Fuck Work, Let's Play, will be published by Pearson. Currently, it's looking like 24th of August on Kindle in 2020. So go to Amazon to find that. And then we're looking at releasing the paperback at the end of the year. And the reason why we're waiting is because we have a potential deal to make a book of the month in one of the most important retailers in the UK, but they will only make a book of the month when it's new. And we don't want to make a book of the month until people are going back into bookshops. So COVID has kind of messed up, bits of my life as it has with everybody else. And we should be having the book launch, next week. And as it is, the paperback will come out later in the year, but you can get the Kindle on the 24th of August. And otherwise, you can find all those links anyway at theideaslab.org.
And you have as well the podcast as well, no?
Of course, yeah. And the podcast, which is called the Ideas Lab Podcast. And we have some fascinating authors like Dan Pink, Nir Eyal, who wrote Indistractable. Dan Pink wrote a book recently about the timing of everyday life called When, and why you don't need to get up early in the morning, which is good news to me. So we have all sorts of fascinating people, and people who are experts in changing habit. We have entrepreneurial stories, how to market yourself, specifics of marketing bots and email marketing and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, check that out if you're a podcast fan.
No, thank you so much. We'll put all these links in the interviews, both on YouTube and as well on the other channels where we're going to be distributing the interview. So thank you so much, John. It's been a privilege, and as well, a lot of things here to think about. But I think, like you said, is really about the focus and as well the things that you like to do. So have a great day, and thank you for these inspirational ideas.
Well, thanks very much, Dinis. I really appreciate it.